Before the rise of London's towers, before Paris glittered with art, there was a city in West Africa whose streets ran straight, whose houses stood in ordered rows, and whose rulers forged an empire of fire and bronze. This was not a myth. It was the Kingdom of Benin, a place so advanced that European visitors called it the most beautiful and organized city they had ever seen. But today, when you hear the name Benin, most people think only of a small modern nation in West Africa, or they do not think of it at all. The grandeur, the walls, the bronzes, the truth was buried beneath centuries of silence, colonial looting, and deliberate forgetting. The Kingdom of Benin was more than just a city. It was an idea, a living civilization that thrived for nearly 1,000 years. A city that built walls longer than the Great Wall of China. A people who mastered bronze casting with techniques still unmatched today. And yet, its memory was almost wiped out in 1897, when British soldiers set the city ablaze, looting treasures that ended up in European museums. This is not just history, it is hidden history. The story of Benin challenges everything we are told about Africa. It asks us, how many civilizations have been erased? How many kingdoms are still hidden in the shadows of time? Welcome to the story of Benin, Africa's city of bronze and fire. Long before colonial maps carved up Africa deep in the forests of present-day Nigeria, a kingdom began to rise. Its people called it Edo, and they called themselves the Edo people. To outsiders, it would later be known as the Kingdom of Benin, not to be confused with today's Republic of Benin, but a powerful state centered in what is now southern Nigeria. The origins of this kingdom are wrapped in legend. According to oral traditions, the Edo people lived under local chiefs, but there was chaos and disorder. The people cried out for a leader who could unite them. Their plea reached the distant land of Ife, considered the sacred cradle of Yoruba civilization. From Ife came a prince, Oranmiyan, son of the great Oduduwa, who became the first ruler of Benin. His reign marked the dawn of kingship, and his son Iweka I would be the first true Oba of Benin, establishing a dynasty that would last for centuries. The Oba was more than a king. He was a sacred figure, believed to be chosen by the gods themselves. His word was law, his presence divine. Over time, the Obas transformed Benin from scattered villages into a centralized state with a capital city that astonished all who saw it. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Benin was already a rising star. Its rulers created a highly organized system of government. There was the Oba at the top, but beneath him worked councils of chiefs, military leaders, and guilds of specialized workers, from metal workers to traders, from priests to palace officials. Everyone had a place, and everyone served the kingdom. But it was not only political power that defined Benin, it was vision. The rulers dreamed of a city that reflected divine order, a city where art, architecture, and spirituality blended into one. And so began the construction of what would one day be called one of the greatest cities in the world. Travelers who later visited Benin could hardly believe their eyes. They spoke of wide, straight streets that stretched for miles, lined with houses whose walls were smooth and red with earth. They wrote of a palace complex so vast it rivaled the castles of Europe. They described markets filled with goods, ivory, pepper, palm oil, cloth, and artworks, unlike anything they had seen before. But behind this order lay discipline, and behind discipline lay fire, the fire of the forge, the fire of the bronze casters, who even in these early centuries were already creating sacred artworks to honor the Oba and the gods. These bronzes were not mere decoration. They were history carved in metal, living records of battles, rituals, and divine power. The people of Benin saw their city as the center of the world, the place where heaven touched earth. To live in Benin was to live in harmony with the ancestors and the gods. Every wall, every street, every sculpture carried meaning. And as the centuries passed, the Kingdom of Benin grew stronger. Its warriors expanded the kingdom's borders, conquering neighboring lands and bringing wealth to the capital. Its traders connected with faraway lands, exchanging goods across Africa. Its rulers, men who were seen as both kings and priests, wove together a kingdom that was as much spiritual as it was political. By the 15th century, Benin was no longer just a kingdom. It was an empire with walls that stretched farther than anyone could imagine, and with an artistic tradition that would one day shock the world. But all great cities are built on foundations of both glory and shadow, and the same fires that lit the forges of bronze would one day consume the kingdom itself. To understand the greatness of Benin, we must walk through its walls. Not the walls of myth, but the walls of earth and fire that once stretched across the forests of West Africa. Walls so vast that historians later compared them to the Great Wall of China. The capital city of Benin, known as Benin City, was no ordinary settlement. At its heart stood the royal palace, an enormous complex of courtyards, shrines and halls, covered in carved ivory and shimmering bronze plaques. From here, the Oba ruled over his kingdom with divine authority, surrounded by priests, soldiers, and craftsmen who served both the throne and the gods. But surrounding the palace was a city unlike any in Europe at the time. Imagine wide streets stretching straight for miles, bordered by houses made of packed earth, their walls smoothed and painted in bright colors. Imagine marketplaces buzzing with life, women trading pepper, ivory, and cloth, men offering bronze tools and weapons, priests chanting prayers to the ancestors, and around it all, the walls. The Benin walls were more than fortifications. They were symbols of unity, protection, and power. Built over centuries by the hands of thousands of workers, the walls consisted of massive earthworks, deep moats dug with precision, with the excavated soil piled high to form towering ramparts. Together, these walls and moats stretched for an astonishing 16,000 kilometers across the kingdom, enclosing not only the city, but also dozens of surrounding villages. By sheer length, they were 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. European travelers who entered Benin in the 15th and 16th centuries wrote about these walls with awe. They described them as an engineering marvel, a feat so advanced that it seemed impossible for a people Europeans considered primitive. Yet here they stood, walls that had taken centuries to build, each trench and rampart shaped by discipline, organization, and the will of the Obas. Inside these walls, life followed a rhythm of order and ritual. The streets were not haphazard. They were planned with precision, running straight as arrows toward the palace at the city's center. This design was not accidental. It reflected the belief that the Oba was the axis of the world, the spiritual and political center of all life. Every road led to him, but the walls also carried another meaning, fire, for the kingdom was forged not only by earth, but by flame. Within Benin, the Guild of Bronze Casters worked tirelessly, their furnaces glowing red with heat as they melted brass and bronze into sacred forms. They belonged to a hereditary guild, bound to the palace, forbidden to share their secrets with outsiders. Using the lost wax method, they created sculptures so intricate and lifelike that centuries later, scholars would call them masterpieces of world art. To the people of Benin, these bronzes were more than art. They were vessels of spirit, living objects that carried history, honored ancestors, and proclaimed the divine power of the Oba. A bronze plaque was not decoration, it was memory itself, hammered into metal so it could never be forgotten. As the city grew, its reputation spread across Africa and beyond. Traders came from distant lands, first from across the Sahara and later from across the seas. When the Portuguese arrived on the coast in the late 15th century, they found a kingdom of astonishing order. They wrote of a city cleaner, more organized and more disciplined than any they had seen in Europe. Yet behind this order lay power. The Oba's authority was absolute, enforced by a disciplined army. Warriors guarded the city gates, armed with spears, bows, and later muskets acquired through trade. The kingdom expanded outward, conquering neighbors, securing resources, and bringing more wealth into Benin City. But power is never without its shadows. The same trade that brought wealth also brought danger. European merchants did not only seek pepper and ivory, they sought people. And soon, the fires of the slave trade began to flicker at Benin's gates. Still, in this period, the city shone at its height. Benin was a living testament to Africa's forgotten glory. Its walls stretched farther than imagination. Its streets pulsed with life. Its bronzes captured eternity in metal. It was a city of walls, a city of fire, a city where heaven and earth met in ritual, art and power. A city that should have stood forever, but shadows were gathering. And the same gates that opened for trade would one day open for conquest. In the heart of Benin, behind the palace walls, burned furnaces that never went cold. Their fires glowed red against the night, their smoke rising into the forest sky like offerings to the gods. From these flames emerged the creations that would one day stun the world, the Benin Bronzes. The people of Benin were not merely artisans, they were guardians of memory, priests of metal. For them, bronze was more than a material. It was the voice of the ancestors, the breath of the Oba, the eternal record of the kingdom. The craft was sacred, entrusted to a hereditary guild known as the Igun Eron One, the bronze casters of Benin. These men were bound by oath to the palace. They could not share their secrets with outsiders, nor could they create for anyone but the Oba himself. Their knowledge was divine inheritance, passed from father to son, generation after generation, as unbroken as the flow of molten metal. Using the lost wax casting method, they achieved what few others in the world had mastered. The process was meticulous, almost ritualistic. First, they sculpted a detailed model in wax. Every line of a face, every curl of hair, every ornament of jewelry. Then they coated the wax figure with clay, sealing it inside. When the mold was placed in the fire, the wax melted away, leaving a hollow space. Into that sacred void, they poured liquid brass or bronze, drawn from the flames like molten rivers of life. When the clay mold was broken open, what remained was more than art. It was transformation. Wax became metal, life became eternity. The subjects of these bronzes were not random. Each plaque, each sculpture told a story. They recorded the deeds of the Obas, the victories of warriors, the ceremonies of priests. They captured leopards, the sacred animal of Benin, symbols of power and ferocity. They depicted Portuguese traders with long noses and bearded faces, their strange European hats and muskets immortalized in African bronze. In these works, history was preserved not on paper, but in metal. While Europe chronicled its kings with ink and parchment, Benin recorded its dynasties with fire and bronze. Images so durable, they could survive centuries of war. Weather and silence, the artistry was unmatched. The plaques gleamed with intricate detail, their figures so lifelike that centuries later, scholars would struggle to believe they were made by African hands. The sculptures of heads, altars, and animals carried an elegance equal to any Renaissance masterpiece. Yet these works were created not for galleries, but for shrines and palaces, to honor ancestors and proclaim the divine right of kingship. The bronzes were also spiritual conduits. In Benin belief, the Oba was not just a king. He was a bridge between the living and the dead, between the people and the gods. The bronzes reflected this sacred role, embodying the spirit of the Oba and the strength of the ancestors. To stand before them was not simply to look at art, but to encounter the kingdom's soul. By the 16th century, when Europeans first laid eyes on Benin's bronzes, they were astonished. The Portuguese marveled at the craftsmanship, writing of a city more advanced than anything they had expected to find in Africa. Later, when British soldiers would loot these bronzes, they would be forced to admit, though grudgingly, that these were works of genius. But here lies the irony. For centuries, the Western world dismissed Africa as a continent without civilization, without art, without history. Yet the bronzes stood in silent defiance. Each plaque, each sculpture, was proof that Africa not only had history, it had history cast in metal that would outlast empires. The bronzes were not only symbols of pride, they were warnings, for in their gleam one could see the greatness of Benin, and the greed they would soon attract. European eyes saw more than art, they saw wealth. And as trade deepened, so too did hunger. The bronzes were eternal, but the kingdom that gave them life was mortal. Soon, the same fires that created them would be engulfed by other flames, flames of conquest, looting, and destruction. The masters of bronze had immortalized their world, but they could not protect it from what was to come. For centuries, the fires of Benin burned bright, its walls unbroken, its palace untouchable, its bronzes eternal. But across the seas, empires were rising. Empires with hunger that no gold, no spice, no ivory could satisfy. Their hunger was for domination. The first ships arrived in the late 15th century. Portuguese sailors, their sails billowing like wings of white cloth, landed on the coast of West Africa. They came seeking trade, and Benin was ready. The kingdom supplied ivory, pepper, and later slaves, while in return, the Portuguese brought cloth, metal, and guns. For a time, both sides benefited. The bronzes of Benin even immortalized these strange foreigners, their pale faces and wide-brimmed hats captured forever in bronze. But where the Portuguese sought trade, the British sought control. By the 19th century, the world had changed. The European powers carved up Africa in a frenzy of conquest, a scramble for land, resources, and glory. The Kingdom of Benin, still proud, still powerful, stood in their path. The British viewed Benin not as a partner, but as an obstacle. The kingdom controlled trade routes along the Niger Delta, and its rulers resisted British attempts to dominate commerce. For the Obas of Benin, trade was sacred, regulated by ritual, guided by tradition. For the British, trade was profit, unrestricted, unchallenged, absolute. Tensions grew. Envoys were sent, treaties were demanded, threats were made. The Oba refused to surrender his sovereignty. To him, the kingdom was eternal, guarded by gods and ancestors. But to the British, it was simply another prize to be seized. In January 1897, the clash came. A British diplomatic mission, led by acting consul James Phillips, set out for Benin City. But this mission was no gesture of peace. It was a provocation, an armed intrusion into sacred territory during a time of ritual when foreigners were forbidden to enter. Warriors of Benin ambushed the party. Shots rang out. Phillips and most of his men were killed. News of the attack reached London, and outrage followed. But this outrage was not grief, it was opportunity. The British had the pretext they needed. What came next would be remembered not as diplomacy, but as devastation. In February 1897, the British launched the Punitive Expedition. A force of 2,200 soldiers and sailors, armed with rifles, machine guns, and artillery, marched on Benin City. Against them stood warriors with muskets, spears, and courage. The outcome was never in doubt. The assault was brutal. British forces stormed the city, burning houses, destroying shrines, and slaughtering those who resisted. Fires consumed the royal palace, flames devouring centuries of history in a single night. Smoke darkened the sky, rising like the kingdom's very soul torn apart. But worse than the fire was the theft. As the city burned, British soldiers looted everything they could carry. Thousands of bronze plaques, ivory tusks, carved heads, altars, and sacred objects were ripped from their places and shipped away. The masterpieces of Benin, the history of a people cast in metal and carved in ivory, were crated up and sent to London. The Oba of Onramwen fled the palace but was captured. Humiliated, stripped of power, he was exiled far from the city he had once ruled. The dynasty that had lasted for centuries was broken, its king silenced, its capital reduced to ashes. When the smoke cleared, Benin was no more. The city of walls, the city of fire, the city of bronze had fallen to an empire that sought not knowledge but plunder. To the British, it was a victory. To the people of Benin, it was a wound that would never heal. The fires of 1897 did not only consume buildings and shrines, they consumed memory. For what the British soldiers carried away from Benin was not simply treasure, it was history itself. Crates packed with bronzes and ivories left the smoking ruins of Benin City, carried downriver to the coast, loaded onto ships bound for London. Within weeks, the sacred bronzes of Benin were displayed in Europe, not as the living soul of a people, but as trophies of conquest. In auction houses and museums, the bronzes were sold, catalogued, and scattered across the Western world. The British Museum took hundreds. Others found their way to Berlin, Paris, Lisbon, and New York. Wealthy collectors purchased them for private collections, admiring their beauty while ignoring the blood that stained their journey. The irony was bitter. For centuries, Europeans had declared Africa a land without art, without civilization, without history. Yet here were the bronzes, masterpieces so refined, so powerful, that they forced the world to confront a lie. Scholars in Europe, confronted with works that rivaled the finest art of the Renaissance, struggled to believe they had been made by African hands. Some even invented false theories, claiming they must have been created by lost Europeans or guided by foreign influence. Anything but the truth, that Africans, in the heart of West Africa, had created a civilization of unparalleled brilliance. But in Benin itself, silence fell. The palace was gone. The shrines were destroyed. The bronzes, once instruments of ritual and memory, were scattered across continents. The people of Benin were left with wounds that could not heal. Wounds not only of fire and exile, but of erasure. A kingdom that had stood for centuries was reduced in Western eyes to a footnote. A tribe conquered, a curiosity in dusty glass cases. Generations passed. The Obas' descendants survived, but stripped of power, they could not rebuild what had been lost. The city remained, but its glory was gone. Where once walls stretched across the land, weeds and silence grew. The bronzes, trapped in foreign museums, became silent witnesses, torn from the land of their ancestors, locked behind glass, admired by millions who rarely knew the story of how they had arrived there. Yet memory cannot be fully destroyed. In whispers, in stories, in the resilience of the Edo people, Benin's spirit endured. Children grew up hearing of the city their ancestors had built, the bronzes that once adorned their shrines, the Obas who had ruled with divine authority. Though scattered, the pieces of memory still glowed, like embers waiting for fire. In the 20th and 21st centuries, a new struggle began, not of armies and muskets, but of truth and justice. African voices rose, demanding the return of the stolen bronzes. Scholars, activists, and descendants of Benin's people challenged the museums of Europe. These works are not yours. They are not trophies. They are not mere artifacts. They are living history. They are memory. They belong to Benin. The struggle continues. Some museums have agreed to return bronzes, small gestures after more than a century of silence. Others still cling to them, refusing to let go of their stolen glory. But each debate, each return, each recognition restores another piece of memory to the people it was taken from. For the bronzes were never just metal. They were the voices of ancestors, the guardians of history, the eternal record of a kingdom that Europe tried to erase. To see them in London or Berlin is to see beauty in exile. To return them to Benin is to return a people's soul. The looting of memory was perhaps the greatest wound of all. But memory has power, and just as the bronzes survived the fire of 1897, so too does the story of Benin survive today, in the voices that tell it, in the art that remains, in the resilience of a people whose history could be stolen but never destroyed. The story of Benin is not just the story of a kingdom, it is the story of how history can be built and how it can be stolen. For centuries, Benin stood as a beacon of power, order, and artistry. Its walls stretched farther than the eye could see. Its bronzes preserved the voices of kings and ancestors. Its people created a civilization that rivaled any in the world. But empire came with fire, and the city of Benin fell. Its treasures were stolen, its memory scattered, its name buried in silence. For more than 100 years, the bronzes that once gave life to shrines and palaces were displayed behind glass in foreign lands, beautiful, but uprooted, stripped of their soul. And yet, Benin did not vanish. Its people endured, its story endured. The bronzes, even in exile, whispered to those who would listen. Africa had history. Africa had glory. Africa had genius. Today, the struggle for restitution continues. One by one, the stolen bronzes are being returned. Slowly, painfully, pieces of memory are coming home. But the fight is not only for objects, it is for truth. For recognition that Africa was never without history, never without art, never without civilization. To remember Benin is to confront the lies that were told about Black history. It is to honor a kingdom that defied time, whose greatness could not be erased by conquest, and so the bronzes still speak. In the gleam of metal shaped by forgotten hands, in the echo of walls that once cut across the earth, in the spirit of a people who refuse to vanish. They tell us history is not lost. It is hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The Kingdom of Benin may have fallen in fire, but its memory rises still, etched in bronze, carried in stories, alive in the hearts of those who refuse to forget. This is not just the past. This is the present. This is hidden Black history.